The hospital's lobby gleams in the soft glow of overhead lights. Polished floors reflect the crisp elegance of the modern art pieces adorning the walls. There's an air of serene professionalism, but beneath the pristine surface, the tension is palpable. Staff bustle through the space, their footsteps echoing as they pass between gleaming reception desks and cushioned seating areas. The sharp scent of antiseptic lingers in the air, a reminder of the hospital's sacred purpose: healing. Yet today, something feels different. Claire Delacroix walks through the lobby with deliberate steps. Her black heels click against the marble floor in a rhythmic pattern that commands attention. Her tailored suit hugs her frame with precision, her platinum blonde hair neatly pulled back in a severe bun. The picture of control, her expression unreadable, her gaze sharp. She surveys the room, ever watchful. A manager's job is never done, she knows this well. Each person in her orbit must stay in line, and today there's an unsettling sense that something is about to disrupt the order. It's just another day in the high-stakes world of healthcare management, or so she believes. Then, the doors of the lobby burst open with an almost theatrical force, and the bustling hum of activity pauses as all eyes turn to the man entering. A man in casual attire jeans, a black hoodie, and a glaring red MAGA hat. Claire's heart skips a beat as her eyes lock on the symbol that has caused endless debate, division, and controversy. A symbol that, until now, she had never associated with this hospital's brand of elite professionalism. For a brief moment, everything feels like it slows down. The man doesn't look like someone important. He's just a figure in the crowd. But the hat brings a wave of unease flooding over her. She knows that the arrival of any new face in this hospital comes with importance, but this is not how she pictured it. No one wears that hat in a place like this, not unless they've come to disrupt something. She steps forward, her instincts kicking in. As the man approaches the receptionist's desk, she closes the distance between them with a practiced grace, her movements precise, purposeful. Her face tightens and her voice is firm as she addresses him. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have a policy here that..." But she falters, stopping mid-sentence when the man reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out a sleek business card. He holds it out to her with a small, almost amused smile. Claire hesitates, her hand hovering in the air. She takes the card, her fingers brushing against his briefly, an odd jolt running through her as she reads the words printed on the card: new owner. The hospital's name, of course, is at the top. Her stomach drops. For a heartbeat, she forgets to breathe. "This has to be a mistake," Claire stammers, her voice betraying the shock running through her. "The owner of this hospital is not a man like you." The man's smile deepens, his tone impossibly calm as he responds, "I beg to differ." There's a faint amusement in his voice that she doesn't know how to read. Her eyes flit from the business card to his face, her mind racing, searching for a way to make sense of this. But no amount of logical thought can anchor her now. The man before her isn't just a random visitor, but the one who owns everything she's worked for. Her fingers tighten around the card, her knuckles pale. For the first time in years, Claire feels a knot of uncertainty twist deep within her gut. The weight of her position, of her control over this hospital, suddenly seems fragile, delicate, like it could shatter with the wrong word or move. She stands frozen, her gaze shifting between the business card and the man in front of her, trying to process the impossible. But Musk's cool, collected demeanor doesn't change. He stands there, unmoving, waiting, as if this is all just another game. And just like that, Claire feels the ground beneath her feet shift. The silence stretches on. Cliffhanger. The camera zooms in on Claire's shocked expression, the weight of her realization sinking in with a crushing intensity. Her breath catches in her throat, her face flushed with the disorienting rush of this unexpected turn. The atmosphere in the room grows heavier, more oppressive, as the true weight of the situation becomes clear. She has just kicked out the new owner of the hospital. Her mind races. What happens next? Will this impulsive action cost her everything she's worked so hard to build? The camera lingers on her face, suspended in a moment of confusion and dread, before the screen fades to black, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats. The hospital had always been Claire's world, a world she had crafted with precision, one calculated decision after another. Her rise to power hadn't been easy. Every step she took, from a lower managerial position to the prestigious role of the hospital's director, had been paved with ambition, hard work, and a ruthless drive that left little room for failure. She had sacrificed her personal life for the career that now defined her. Long nights in the office, endless meetings, constant strategizing, these were the things that made Claire de la Croix the woman she was. She had fought tooth and nail for her place at the top, and now that she was there, she wasn't about to let anything or anyone jeopardize her position. At 45, Claire had a sharp, commanding presence. Her platinum blonde hair was always impeccably styled, her suit perfectly tailored, her heels echoing with authority as she strode through the sterile halls of Silver Creek Medical Center. The hospital itself reflected the power Claire had worked so hard to maintain: gleaming floors, high-end medical technology, and an air of exclusivity that was undeniable. This wasn't just a hospital, it was a status symbol, and Claire was the one who made sure it stayed that way. She had always been driven by one thing: status. Growing up, Claire had learned from her father, a shrewd businessman who had built an empire from the ground up, that success was everything. Nothing else mattered. Love, friendship, personal fulfillment, all secondary to power and influence. She had carried that belief with her as she climbed the corporate ladder, never once considering the cost. The few romantic relationships she had tried had withered away as her career consumed her. Her friends were few, her family even fewer. But none of it mattered. She was the manager of Silver Creek now, and that was all that had ever truly mattered to her. Her rise had been hard-fought, filled with politics, backroom deals, and cold decisions. She had outmaneuvered rivals, played her part in corporate games, and never once allowed anyone to see her vulnerability. There was no room for weakness at the top, and as the manager of one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country, Claire felt like she was untouchable. She had secured her position in the face of constant scrutiny, and now she was the one who made the decisions. But there were whispers in the halls of Silver Creek, whispers Claire hadn't quite believed. Talks of a mysterious new investor, someone poised to take over the hospital's ownership. She had heard the rumors but dismissed them as idle chatter, the kind of gossip that always swirled around a place like this. After all, she was the one in charge. Nothing would change that. Nothing ever had. But today, as she walked through the hospital lobby and felt the familiar rhythm of the place settle into her bones, something felt different. The air seemed thicker, charged with anticipation. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but Claire felt it. It wasn't until she saw him, the man in the red MAGA hat, that the truth began to settle in. Claire had always prided herself on her ability to read people, to understand who they were the moment they entered her orbit. But this man, standing in the hospital lobby with a casual, almost defiant air, was different. He didn't fit the image she had in mind when she thought of a potential investor. He wasn't dressed in a suit or carrying the air of authority that she expected. In fact, there was nothing particularly remarkable about him except for the hat. That hat, with its bold letters, was a symbol of something divisive, something that had caused controversy in the country. Claire had heard enough about it on the news to recognize its significance immediately. Her instincts kicked in before she even had a chance to think. She had been trained to handle situations like this: visitors who didn't belong, who threatened the order she had worked so hard to maintain. Without a second thought, Claire moved toward him, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step measured and sure. Her gaze never left him as she approached, and when she spoke, her voice was firm, unwavering. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have a policy here that—" Her words faltered as the man, seemingly unfazed by her approach, reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. Claire's hand froze in midair as he held it out to her, his eyes calm, almost amused. She took the card, her fingers brushing against his briefly. There was a strange feeling that passed through her as she read the words on the card: new owner. She blinked, her eyes refocusing on the card as if to make sense of what she was reading. The hospital's name was printed at the top, but everything else felt wrong. Claire's stomach twisted in confusion. "This has to be a mistake," she said, the words escaping her before she could stop them. Her voice wavered slightly, betraying her growing discomfort. "The owner of this hospital is not a man like you." The man smiled, a faint curve of his lips that was more knowing than anything else. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the sudden chaos that was erupting inside Claire's mind. He wasn't rattled. In fact, he seemed almost entertained by her response. "I beg to differ," he said smoothly, his voice carrying a quiet authority that Claire couldn't ignore. Her heart raced, her mind spinning. This man was the new owner? The thought was incomprehensible. Claire's world, which had seemed so secure just moments ago, now felt fragile. She was the one in control. She was the one who made the decisions. But now, standing before her, was a man who held the power to take it all away. For the first time in years, Claire felt herself losing her footing. The walls of her carefully constructed life were crumbling before her eyes. She could feel the weight of the business card in her hand, the realization sinking in that she had just kicked out the new owner of the hospital. A bitter taste rose in her throat, and for a brief moment, Claire was paralyzed. Her mind raced, trying to catch up to the overwhelming shock of the moment. How could this be happening, she thought, but before she could find an answer, the man's calm, amused smile lingered in her peripheral vision, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. And that, in itself, was terrifying. In the days that followed, the hospital seemed to be in a strange, unsettling limbo. The incident in the lobby had rocked Claire to her core, but she tried to maintain her composure. The whispers about the new owner were everywhere. Dr. Martin Bennett, the chief of surgery, was one of the first to approach her. Martin had been a fixture at Silver Creek for over 2 decades. He was brilliant, respected, and more than a little cynical. Over the years, Claire had relied on him for guidance when it came to medical matters, but the professional bond they shared had always been laced with tension. Martin was a man who had built his career on passion, on healing. Claire, on the other hand, had always been about the business, about making the hospital a shining beacon of success. Their differences had never been more apparent than now. "You should have known about the change in ownership," Martin said, his voice low and tinged with frustration as they stood in her office. "This was a huge move. People are talking." Claire's eyes narrowed. "You think I don't know what's going on in this hospital?" she snapped, her voice hard. Martin took a step closer, his brow furrowed in concern. "It's not just about knowing, it's about preparing for it. And we're not prepared." "Don't start with me," Martin, Claire said, her tone icy. "I'm handling it." "Are you?" Martin shot back. "I don't know if you can handle this." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and for the first time, Claire wondered if Martin was right. She had always prided herself on being prepared for anything, but nothing had prepared her for this. A new owner, someone who clearly had no respect for her authority, was a threat unlike any she had faced before. Then there was Lena, her assistant. Lena had been with her for almost 2 years now, a bright, eager young woman with an uncanny ability to anticipate Claire's needs. But there was something about Lena's ambition that made Claire uneasy. Lena was quiet, observant, and seemed to know exactly when to offer her help. But the more Claire thought about it, the more she began to wonder if Lena had been too eager to please. Lena's loyalty was always in question, and now, with the arrival of the new owner, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the young assistant might be playing both sides. The whispers about the mysterious investor continued to swirl, but Claire refused to let them get under her skin. She wasn't about to lose control of the hospital, not now, not ever. But the doubt was beginning to creep in, and she could no longer ignore it. The walls that had once seemed so solid were starting to feel fragile. The foundation she had spent years building was crumbling, piece by piece. And the most terrifying part was she didn't know who to trust anymore. The next morning, Claire found herself unable to shake the memory of the encounter with the man in the lobby. Elon Musk, she thought, the name echoing in her head as she prepared for the board meeting. How had she not recognized him? How had she not connected the dots when the rumors about the new owner began circulating? Her heart ached with the realization that, in her overconfidence, she had missed the most obvious sign. He hadn't been just any investor, he had been the new owner, and she had dismissed him with all the arrogance of someone who believed that nothing could ever threaten her position. Now, as she walked into the boardroom, she felt a sharp discomfort twisting in her gut. The air was thick with tension, as if the room itself was waiting for something to shift. Claire's eyes swept over the faces of the board members. Most of them were present, their usual confident expressions replaced by something she couldn't quite place. They were all focused on the man sitting at the head of the table, the same man who had stood in the lobby the day before, wearing that red MAGA hat, a symbol of controversy and division. But here, in the cold, impersonal space of the hospital's boardroom, there was no trace of that symbol. Instead, Elon Musk sat poised and authoritative, his sharp features set in a quiet determination. His usual casual demeanor was replaced by a sharp business acumen, and Claire couldn't help but notice how naturally he assumed control. As she took her seat, she could feel the eyes of the board members on her, as if they were waiting for her to speak first. But she didn't. Instead, she watched Musk, who gave a small nod as if acknowledging her presence, though his focus remained on the task at hand. Musk began to speak, his voice calm and measured. "I'm sure you've all had your questions about the changes I've planned for this hospital. We're moving into a new phase, and that means it's time for some major overhauls, renovations, new policies, and a complete reorganization of the management structure." The words hit Claire like a punch to the gut. She had heard rumors of renovations and changes, but she had assumed they were minor adjustments, perhaps some cosmetic updates, or a few policy changes to reflect the hospital's evolving needs. But this was different. This was a sweeping change, a declaration that everything Claire had built, everything she had worked for, was about to be torn down and rebuilt according to someone else's vision. As Musk spoke, Claire's thoughts whirled in a chaotic spiral. She couldn't look away from him. The man who had been a stranger yesterday was now the one calling the shots, commanding the entire room. Every word that came from his mouth seemed to solidify his control over the hospital in a way that made Claire's chest tighten with frustration and helplessness. "The hospital is in need of a fresh direction," Musk continued, outlining his vision for the future. "We'll be introducing a new leadership structure. The management team will be undergoing some changes as well, with an emphasis on streamlining operations and improving patient care. But make no mistake, our goal is to be the best, not just in terms of medical technology, but in every aspect. We want to lead the way in patient outcomes, in community outreach, and in cutting-edge research." His tone was persuasive, his words seemingly flawless. Claire could feel the weight of his authority in every sentence. It was as if he had always been the one in charge, and this had always been the plan. Every board member around the table nodded in agreement, their eyes fixed on him with rapt attention. There was no hesitation, no questioning. They were already following his lead. Claire's stomach twisted. She had always been the one in control of the room, the one whose words commanded respect. Now here she was, unable to even speak up, unable to find a way to assert her dominance in a space that had once been entirely her domain. Then, as if to underline his control over the situation, Musk turned his attention to Claire. His eyes were steady, as if he had known all along that this moment would come. "Claire," Musk said, his voice smooth but carrying a hint of something darker, "I think you've done good work here. But as I said, things are changing. As part of the restructuring, your position as hospital manager will be under review. We want to make sure we're aligned with the new direction I'm taking. I trust you understand." The words hit Claire like a freight train. The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and for a moment her vision blurred. Under review? She had never once questioned her position. She had never thought that her hard work, her sacrifice, would be so easily discarded. And yet, here was Musk, calmly dismantling everything she had worked for. "Under review," Claire repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt like a challenge to even say the words. She had built this place from the ground up, had fought tooth and nail to secure her position. She was the one who had made Silver Creek the success it was today. But now, it seemed as though all of that meant nothing. Musk didn't flinch. His expression remained as calm and composed as ever, but Claire saw something in his eyes, something that made her blood run cold. It wasn't just about business for him. It was about control. It was about power. And in this moment, it was clear that Claire was no longer in charge. The other board members were still nodding, their faces neutral, as though this was all perfectly natural. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing to process the gravity of what was happening. How had it come to this? How had she been so blind? All her years of hard work, all her sacrifices, suddenly seemed so insignificant. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She wanted to argue, to fight back, to demand that her position be solidified. She wanted to scream that she had built this hospital, that she was the one who had made it what it was. But the look in Musk's eyes told her that it wouldn't matter. He was the one in control now, and he wasn't about to back down. As he continued to speak, outlining his plans in precise detail, Claire's mind seemed to spin out of control. She couldn't focus on his words. All she could hear were the echoes of her own thoughts, questions without answers. Had I been too blinded by my own pride? Had I sacrificed too much for this role? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this moment, the moment where everything she had worked for began to slip away, wasn't just about Musk's takeover of the hospital. It was about her own blind spots, the choices she had made to protect her own ego and ambition instead of preparing for the inevitable. She had let herself get too comfortable, too comfortable, too confident. And now she was paying the price. Later that afternoon, as the meeting adjourned and the board members filed out of the room, Claire sat alone at the table. The sharp sound of the door closing behind her seemed to echo in her ears, amplifying the silence that had fallen over the room. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had been outplayed, that she had allowed herself to be manipulated by Musk's quiet confidence. She had known that change was inevitable. She had always known that Silver Creek couldn't stay the same forever. But she had never imagined that change would come in the form of a man who had taken one look at her, sized her up, and decided that she was expendable. The reality of it was sinking in now, and it was harder to accept than she had ever imagined. The hospital, the empire she had built, was no longer hers to command. She was no longer the one who made the decisions. Her fingers drummed nervously on the edge of the table, and for the first time in years, Claire felt truly lost. The days following Musk's announcement were some of the hardest Claire had ever endured. Each morning, she walked through the hospital's pristine halls, but the air felt different, charged with a tension she couldn't quite place. It was as though the place she had built from the ground up, the institution she had poured her blood, sweat, and tears into, was no longer hers. The walls seemed to close in on her with each passing moment, and the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic and freshly polished floors only made her feel more alienated. She no longer had the authority she once wielded, nor the respect she was accustomed to. There were whispers in the hallways, soft murmurs among the nurses, the staff, and the doctors. She could hear the rustle of voices behind closed doors, the curious glances that followed her every step. The once familiar faces of her colleagues had been replaced by new staff members, all of whom seemed eager to please Musk. They were eager to align themselves with the new order, to show that they were loyal to the man who now held the reins of Silver Creek. As Claire moved through the hospital, it felt as though the building had been swallowed by a force she couldn't control. The patients who had once trusted her, who had known her as the face of Silver Creek, were now in the hands of strangers. They were treated by new nurses and doctors, and even the administrative staff had been replaced by those loyal to Musk's growing influence. Claire had once prided herself on knowing every inch of the hospital, on having a hand in every decision. Now it seemed like she was nothing more than a figurehead, an ornament in the sterile halls she had spent years perfecting. But it wasn't just the atmosphere of the hospital that had changed, it was the people around her. In the weeks since Musk's takeover, she had begun to notice the subtle shifts in behavior among her closest allies. It started with Dr. Martin, the chief of surgery. He had always been a man of sharp opinions, but recently his cold, cynical nature seemed to have grown even more distant. Their conversations were stilted, and he had become more reticent in meetings, his eyes often flicking toward Musk with a nervous respect that Claire hadn't seen before. It was as if Dr. Martin, who had been one of her most trusted confidants, had already surrendered to Musk's vision of the future. But the true betrayal came from someone Claire never could have imagined: Lena. Lena had been Claire's right hand for years. She was more than just a personal assistant. She had been Claire's protégé, the one Claire had mentored, the one she had trusted to help her navigate the labyrinth of hospital politics. Lena had always been eager, always ready to go the extra mile to ensure the hospital ran smoothly. Claire had considered her more like a sister than an employee. They had shared late-night phone calls, conversations over lunch, and countless hours of work together, building Silver Creek into the institution it had become. But Lena had been playing a different game all along. It was late one evening when Claire first suspected that something was wrong. She had been going over some paperwork in her office, preparing for the next board meeting, when she overheard Lena talking on the phone in the hallway just outside her door. At first, Claire didn't think much of it. But then she heard Lena's voice, clear, sharp, and unmistakably confident. She wasn't speaking in the soft, deferential tone that Claire had come to expect from her assistant. No. Lena was speaking with the authority of someone who was negotiating terms. "I'm in. It's just a matter of time now," Lena was saying. "I'll be in the new leadership team, I've made sure of it. Don't worry, Claire won't be able to stop us. We'll have the upper hand. The words hit Claire like a hammer, shattering the fragile sense of trust she had left. Lena's betrayal cut deeper than any of Musk's decisions. It wasn't just a matter of business or a shift in power, it was personal. Lena had been working with Musk from the very beginning, scheming behind Claire's back to secure her own position in the new regime. Claire's heart sank. She couldn't bring herself to confront Lena immediately. Instead, she waited until the next morning. She called Lena into her office under the pretense of needing to discuss some administrative matters. When Lena entered, her usual cheerful demeanor was in place, but Claire could see the subtle shift in her eyes, a guardedness, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Lena, we need to talk," Claire said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. Lena gave a nervous smile. "Of course, Claire. What's on your mind?" "Don't play games with me," Claire snapped, her gaze cold as ice. "I know what you've been up to. I overheard your conversation last night. I know you've been working with Musk this whole time. You've been planning your own rise to power, haven't you?" Lena's expression faltered, just for a second, but it was enough to confirm everything. Claire's heart was in her throat as she watched the young woman before her shift from defensiveness to a strange, calculating calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lena said, her voice now smooth, almost too smooth. "But if you're asking if I'm aligning myself with Musk..." "Yes, Claire, I am. I've worked hard for this. I'm ambitious, and this is my chance to finally take control. You knew this day was coming. You knew that you wouldn't be in charge forever." Lena's words were like a slap to the face. Claire stood frozen, unable to speak. The betrayal was so much deeper than she could have imagined. Lena, the girl she had trusted, the one she had mentored and nurtured, had used her to get ahead. The young woman had been angling for a leadership position in Musk's new regime all along. It was never about loyalty or respect. It was about ambition and the desire for power. "I thought we were friends," Claire whispered, her voice breaking despite her best efforts to remain composed. "I thought you were someone I could trust." Lena didn't flinch. Her expression remained unmoved, a slight smile curling at the corners of her lips. "I trusted you too, Claire," she said softly. "But this is business. This is how it works. Musk is the future, and I'm going to be part of that future. You can't stop me, and you can't stop him." As Lena turned and walked out of the office, Claire felt a coldness settle in her chest. She had been blindsided by everyone she had trusted. But the betrayal didn't stop with Lena. As Claire dug deeper into Musk's business dealings, she began to uncover a web of corruption that reached far beyond the walls of Silver Creek. She contacted former colleagues, trying to rally support for her cause, trying to find someone who still believed in her vision for the hospital. But every lead turned up empty. Everyone had already chosen their side. It wasn't just Lena who had been swayed by Musk's power, it was everyone. Even those she thought were her closest allies had already made their peace with the changes he was bringing. The more Claire investigated, the more she realized just how dangerous Musk truly was. He wasn't just a businessman looking to turn a profit. There were darker, more sinister forces at play. Musk had a reputation for taking over companies and dismantling them, not with brute force, but with calculated precision. He had left a trail of broken partnerships, bankruptcies, and destroyed careers behind him. And now Silver Creek was just another piece in his growing empire. Claire's mind raced as she weighed her options. She could accept the changes and remain in the hospital under Musk's thumb, a mere puppet in a game she no longer controlled. Or she could fight back, risk everything, and try to take the hospital back from the man who had stolen it from her. The choice wasn't easy. But one thing was clear: the fight wasn't over yet. And Claire would do whatever it took to take back what was hers. The air in Musk's office was heavy with the sterile scent of expensive leather and polished wood. The high-rise windows framed the skyline, casting a cold, metallic light over the sleek furniture. Claire stood at the threshold of the room, her heart hammering in her chest, but her face remained composed. This was it, the moment she had prepared for, the moment she'd been dreading, the moment that would determine her future. She had called for the meeting, demanding to speak with Musk directly, and to her surprise he had agreed without hesitation. He sat behind his glass desk, fingers steepled, eyes calm, his expression unreadable. His usual smug confidence was still there, but there was something new, something colder, lurking beneath his surface. Claire had never fully understood the man, and now, standing before him, she was more certain than ever that she never would. She closed the door behind her and approached the desk, her steps deliberate, each one carrying the weight of the last few weeks. Every part of her wanted to burst into rage, to demand answers, but she knew better. Rage wouldn't get her anywhere. She had to play this carefully. "I asked to meet with you because I need answers," Claire said, her voice even, though her stomach churned with nerves. "You've turned this hospital into something unrecognizable, Musk. You've replaced staff, you've made decisions behind my back, and you've humiliated me in front of my colleagues." Musk's lips twitched into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. He leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving hers. "You're still holding on to something that's already gone, Claire," he said smoothly. "The hospital Silver Creek isn't the same place it was when you were in charge, and it never will be again." Claire's fists clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I built this hospital," she said, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "I gave everything to this place, and you come in and tear it apart like it's nothing. Why?" Musk leaned forward, his gaze sharp now, almost predatory. "Because it was never about the hospital, Claire," he replied, his tone flat. "It was about power. It always was. You were a means to an end, a stepping stone. And I knew exactly how to play you." A chill ran down Claire's spine. She had never fully understood Musk's motivations, but now the truth was becoming clear. This wasn't about fixing the hospital. It was about control, about manipulating people, about using them for his own gain. Everything, the changes, the staff replacements, the humiliation had been part of his plan from the very beginning. "You knew," Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "You knew everything from the start." Musk nodded, his eyes glinting with a cold satisfaction. "Of course. I didn't hire Lena by accident. I made sure she was planted in your team from the very beginning. She was the perfect insider. She did exactly what I needed her to do: gain your trust, work her way up, and when the time came, she'd be my eyes and ears. You were never the threat, Claire. You were always a pawn, and I played you like one." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Claire's mind raced, the images of her past weeks flashing before her: Lena's smiles, her soft assurances, the way she had always been there to support her. All of it had been a lie, carefully crafted and executed. Lena hadn't been her ally, she had been Musk's secret weapon, a traitor working from within. But why all of this? Claire choked out, trying to steady herself. The changes, the public humiliation, the constant undermining. Why not just take over and let things be? Why make it so personal? Musk's lips curved into a thin, almost cruel smile. "Because you needed to be broken first," he said, his voice low. "You needed to see just how powerless you were, how easily I could strip you of everything you held dear. You were so caught up in your own sense of control, in your status as the manager of this place, that you never saw the bigger picture. I wanted you to realize that you were never in charge. I wanted to show you that no matter how hard you worked, no matter how much you achieved, it was never enough. And now, you see it, don't you?" The realization hit Claire like a wave. Musk wasn't just taking over the hospital, he was dismantling her very sense of self, her identity, her worth. He had used her ambition, her pride, her need to control, and turned it all against her. The hospital, the power, it had never been about saving Silver Creek. It had always been about breaking her. Tears stung the corners of Claire's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had spent too many years building herself up to let a man like Musk destroy everything she was. She had come too far. Musk leaned back in his chair, watching her with an almost bored expression, waiting for her to process the truth. And then, without a hint of emotion, he spoke again. "I'm giving you a choice, Claire," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. "You can join me. Work with me, help me continue to reshape this place. You'll have power, you'll have influence, and you'll be part of the new order. Or you can walk away, leave now, and watch everything you worked for crumble into dust." Claire's mind spun as she stood there, trying to process what he was offering. Her eyes locked onto Musk's, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had slowed. What was the right choice? To give in, to accept the position he was offering, to continue living under his shadow, or to walk away and start over, knowing that she would lose everything she had built? But in that moment, something clicked inside her. She had been so focused on power, on maintaining control, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. It wasn't the hospital. It wasn't the title or the prestige or the influence. It was her. It was her integrity, her sense of self, and that was something Musk could never take from her. "I'm not going to be your pawn," Claire said, her voice steady, the words tasting bitter on her tongue but filling her with a strange sense of clarity. "I'm done being controlled. You'll never break me." For a moment, Musk's expression flickered. It was the first sign of vulnerability she had seen in him, an expression of surprise, perhaps even disbelief, that she would reject his offer. "You really think you can walk away from this?" Musk asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You really think you have a choice?" Claire didn't hesitate. "Yes, I do." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving the man who had tried to destroy her in the dust. As she stepped into the hallway, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The power struggle, the games, the manipulation, they no longer mattered. She had chosen her path, and for the first time in a long while, Claire felt free. But as she walked out of the building and into the cool night air, she knew that the fight wasn't over. Musk would try to destroy her reputation, to tear apart everything she had worked for. But she would rebuild. She would rise again. And this time, she would do it on her own terms. "Absolutely, I can expand this further and develop the emotional depth and character interactions. Here's a more detailed approach to the resolution." Conclusion. Claire stood outside the gleaming doors of Silver Creek Hospital, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. It was almost surreal. The hospital she had dedicated the last decade of her life to was now a distant memory, a place that had once defined her identity but no longer held any power over her. The glass walls that towered above her seemed to reflect an image she barely recognized anymore. The woman who had entered these doors years ago, full of ambition and fire, was now standing at the precipice of something new, a life she hadn't anticipated, a future she hadn't imagined. For the first time in a long while, Claire didn't feel the heavy burden of responsibility weighing her down. There was no more constant pressure to meet expectations, to please higher-ups, to maintain a reputation. It was gone, along with her position, her influence, her title. Yet, strangely, she felt liberated. As Claire stood there, feeling the cool breeze against her skin, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led her here. The ambition that had once been her driving force, her insatiable need to climb higher, to conquer, to control, had consumed her. It had made her blind to the people around her, to the friendships that might have been real, to the humanity she had neglected in her pursuit of power. She had told herself that it was all worth it, that the sacrifices, the long hours, the personal compromises were all part of the price she had to pay. But in the end, she had learned the hard way that none of it truly mattered. She took a deep breath, her chest tightening as the truth settled over her. What have I really lost? The people she had trusted most, Lena, Martin, all of them had been playing a game she hadn't even known she was part of. Lena had been the first to betray her, worming her way into Musk's camp, undermining Claire's position for months. Lena's ambition had been obvious, but Claire had ignored the signs. She had trusted Lena like a sister, believing she had her back, never suspecting that her assistant had been working behind the scenes to advance her own career at Claire's expense. Claire had poured her time, energy, and trust into Lena, and all it had gotten her was betrayal. Then there was Martin. She had always felt that something was off with him, the lingering discontent, the subtle critiques of her management style, his growing frustration with the direction the hospital was taking. But Claire had dismissed it. She had believed that as long as he kept performing his duties well, everything would be fine. It wasn't until the final board meeting that Claire had fully realized how far his loyalty had stretched to Musk. Martin, too, had played his part in the power game, quietly supporting Musk's ascension, silently feeding him the information he needed to strip Claire of her power. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp ring of her phone. She glanced down at the screen and saw the familiar name Lena. Without thinking, she answered the call, holding the phone to her ear as she continued to walk down the street. Claire, Lena's voice was sweet, almost too sweet. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for things to go this far. But you have to understand I had no choice. Musk is powerful, and this was the only way I could have gotten ahead. I thought you'd understand. Claire's grip tightened on the phone. The words were everything she had expected: apologetic, defensive, and laced with justification. Lena had always been good at making herself seem like the victim, even when she was the one causing the damage. "I understand," Claire said, her voice cold and composed. "But you've made your choice, and I've made mine." Lena sighed on the other end, her voice faltering for a moment. "I didn't want it to end like this, Claire. I really didn't." But Claire was already done listening. She could hear the guilt in Lena's voice, but it didn't matter anymore. The betrayal had been made, the trust had been broken, and there was no going back. "Goodbye, Lena," she said, hanging up without another word. It wasn't easy letting go of the people she had once considered allies, but Claire knew it was necessary. There was no room for weak connections, no room for people who didn't understand the cost of ambition. She would have to rebuild, but she wouldn't make the same mistakes again. As she continued walking, her mind turned to the decision she had made in Musk's office. She had rejected his offer, turned down the power he promised. At the time, she had been sure that walking away was the right choice. But as the days passed, she had questioned herself more than once. What was left for her now? Was she truly done with power? Could she build something new without losing herself in the process? The answer, Claire knew, was yes. But it wouldn't be easy. She had to start from scratch, rebuild from the ground up. It would take time. She didn't know exactly what her future held, but she did know this: she would never let herself be controlled again. She had learned the true cost of power, and it was a lesson she would carry with her always. Her first step was clear: she needed to find her own path. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but she had to trust that it would be better than where she had been. She had once been blinded by ambition, but now she was walking with her eyes wide open. Days turned into weeks, and Claire found herself distancing herself from the hospital, from the chaos that Musk had created. She started working on smaller projects, ones that didn't require her to compromise her values or sacrifice her soul for a paycheck. She spoke with old colleagues, many of whom had been left behind in Musk's upheaval, and began helping them find new roles, new opportunities, away from the grasp of the man who had taken everything from her. The more she worked on these smaller, more meaningful tasks, the clearer it became she didn't need Silver Creek Hospital to define her. She could create something new, something authentic. She didn't need to climb the corporate ladder anymore. What mattered now was making a real difference in ways that didn't rely on power or prestige. She could build from the ground up with integrity, with honesty, and most importantly, on her own terms. One afternoon, as Claire sat at a small cafe, sipping coffee and sketching out ideas for a new health initiative, she found herself reflecting on the hospital. Silver Creek had been her entire world, and yet now it felt like a distant memory, a place where her pride and ambition had held sway, but where her true self had been lost. But it was no longer a source of pain or regret. It was simply a chapter that had ended. Looking out the window, Claire smiled softly. She was no longer the woman who would sacrifice everything for the sake of power. She was no longer driven by the need to prove herself. She was finally free. The real journey had only just begun. And this time, Claire knew that she would write her own story.